Hey guys, welcome to episode 3 of Talkin Baseball with Pars and Vinny. We're here filming at St. Anthony's High School with the head coach, Paul Porcelano, my co-host on this episode, and we're going to dive into a number of different topics today. We're going to talk about the legacy of Bill Batewell, who passed away this past weekend, 79 years old, legendary head coach here on Long Island. We're going to talk about the Hall of Fame voting and, another year where we get shut out, only the second in the last decade, only a few other times of that in history. But
I think 4 times since '61, I think was what I read.
Yeah, it's few and far between, so we're going to dive into that. But first, quick message from our sponsors at Brothers 3 Pool. Did you miss out on having a swimming pool this past summer because of COVID-19? Don't let your family miss out again on another summer of swimming pool fun. Small pool shoppers are purchasing their pools right now from Brothers 3, so they will be prepared for next summer, whether we are trapped at home, COVID or not. Let Brothers 3 assist you in planning your backyard now. You and your family will be ready to enjoy next summer. Call Brothers 3 at 516-735-7435. Let's get you started on your way to family fun. All right, Par, so you're a Sachem product. Bill Batewell, of course, an absolutely legendary character, I guess you can say.
Yeah.
Not just a coach, really larger-than-life personality. 452 wins, 2 county championships. So I'll let you take the floor since you know him a lot better than I do.
Oh, you know what? I think he ended up with, 600 if you attached the Belfort part of it, right?
Close to it, yeah.
Look, Bates changed my life. I was telling you this story beforehand, and anybody that watches that knows me probably knows the backstory. I don't talk about it too much in my high school days because it was, 30-some-odd years ago. Mm-hmm. But to sum up Bates... He's changed so many guys' lives, as you can tell over the last week. The flood of Facebook and Instagram posts and Twitter posts of how awesome he was. It's the truth. I don't think you can name a guy that would have a negative thing to say about Bates. From old school coaches, new coaches, to players. From my point of view, I was going to post something on Facebook, this long thing, because I saw a couple other guys did, but I kept it simple because what he means to me is he changed my life in a point where, to explain to you guys, I got cut from the baseball team in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. I was a small dude. I was lefty. I weighed 120 pounds.
And Sachem was always...
And Sachem, we had 2 freshman teams. We had 2 middle school teams, 2 7th grade teams, 2 8th grade teams, 2 9th grade teams. So we would have 150, 200 kids try out every year back in the 80s. And, I got missed because I was a little guy. I didn't throw hard and just one of everybody else. And for whatever reason, in 10th grade, I blew up to 6'3", 150. But I was still the same gangly mess of a kid. And I wasn't asked to try out. My buddy Kevin wanted me to try out just to keep him company because I had given it up. After 7th and 8th and 9th grade and getting cut, why bother? And my buddy Kevin McCann, who ended up going to college with me, and we ended up, he's an Nassau cop now. He talked me into getting the health clearance and trying out. So I went into tryouts just as a lark. All right, I'll do it. Why not? One more time. And I remember I was pitching downstairs to a kid named Scott Bayer, who was the captain of the football team. He ended up being the captain as varsity guy. And I was throwing downstairs in that little tucked-in basement. I was one of the last guys to throw. And I remember I was just throwing, and I saw Bates come out of the office. I guess Mr. Murphy, who was the JV coach at the time, who was doing the evals, him and Mr. Roth, who was another, I think he was the freshman coach, called Bates out. And I remember Bates standing there, and Bates was such an imposing dude. He was, 6'4", 260? And he's watching me, and I could see out of the corner of my eyes, and I was petrified. I'm trying to throw, and I see him pointing with his big hand, this and that, and he's talking to Murphy and talking to Roth. I get finished throwing, and he calls me over, and I remember him putting his hand on my shoulder and say, "Hey, what's your name, buddy?" You know what I mean? I was stepping, and we had a little conversation, small talk. I didn't think much of it. I remember I went home that night, and I was like, you know what? I might make this team. And Bates posted the list 2 days later, and I think he posted around third period. And I took a bathroom pass to go down because I knew around third period they were posting it down by the wrestling room. And I remember going downstairs, and I remember looking at the list. The list was up, and I ran over to it. And I remember scrolling down, and I saw my name on there. And it was I can't express how unbelievable it was that I made the team. I made it. From that point on, Bates was a complete mentor to me because my velocity ticked up. JV year, I led the team in wins, innings pitched, ERA, the whole 9 in 10th grade, after never pitching for Sachem. And he put me on a summer team in the Connie Mack League with some of the best teams around. Biggio played for the Smithtown Comets or Patchogue Comets, whatever they were called. And being a 10th grader playing with juniors and seniors who I had no experience playing. I played some Little League and some town stuff, but no real high-end baseball. So Bates was the singular reason why 35 years later I'm a head coach at a big school. It's all based off of Bates, because where I am now wouldn't have happened if he didn't take a liking to me. I would have been cut. I never would have played basketball. I probably maybe would have played basketball or something like that. And he just changed my life. And a couple of years ago, I got to see him, and I told this story. And Bates, he's so indifferent to it. He's like, "Oh yeah, you were a good player. You figured it out. Good for you." And he didn't. I don't think he's so unassuming in the point that he's changed so many lives. But it's hard to put it in context. Is what he did. I remember my senior year when I finally figured it out and turned into a decent guy, a college caliber pitcher. The first scholarship I got offered was Iona, and it was in March of my senior year. And Newsday did a full page story. A guy named Greg Herman or Mark Herman was he ended up covering the Mets for years, or the Yankees.
Mark Herman, yeah, I remember him.
And he was still a young writer, and he came down, did a full page article on me getting cut when I was a kid, and I turned into this guy. And I just remember Bates was so indifferent to the whole thing, like it was not a big deal, and it was such a big deal to me, and he made me feel so comfortable. And maybe I'm just rambling here because I'm getting emotional thinking of what he did for me, and I'm one of hundreds of guys that he's done stuff like that. So he changed my life without even being aware that he changed my life. Mm-hmm. He was picking me up because my parents had one car. He would pick me up for all the games when I was in 10th grade. He let me coach the Sachem baseball camp in 11th grade, which was a big deal. Like asking a high school player to coach the camp with Bates and Dragonette and Roth and Murphy. He had me do the camp, and I was a skinny beanpole of a kid. I didn't know anything. Thinking back now as a head coach, he did it for a reason, to show me how to go about doing stuff, because he knew I was going to turn into a guy. Mm-hmm. So he did all these intangible things that I didn't do the math on until I turned into a full-fledged coach. And it's a sad day for Sachem. It's a sad day for all of us that got lucky enough to play for him. And it's hard. I get a little choked up about it, but he had a great life. And honestly, I'm just happy that he touched me, and he allowed me to turn into this, being able to sit at a table, talk to a guy like you, Vin, and talk baseball, which, thinking back when I was 14, 15, this would be a pipe dream.
And one of the other aspects I find amazing is when you look at people talk about Belichick's coaching tree. It's almost like he's got his own coaching tree. Over 20 players. I tried to do an article on it a couple years ago, and we actually lost track because there's guys that are all over the country, actually. It's not just Long Island. He's got a couple in Virginia, a couple in Colorado, people that I didn't know their names, so I wasn't able to reach them. So I didn't think we'd get the full scope of the article. But just talking into his assistant coach, Joe Murphy, he said it was about 25, which is unbelievable.
That's insane.
Because that says more than the college scholarships. Because he basically made these guys fall in love with the game. And now that's 25 people that have incomes from baseball because of him, or partially because of him, and now potentially those 25 can have more seats throughout the game.
Yes,
so
and the way he coached, there was so much more to it than the X's and O's part of it. It's the way he made the players feel, the confidence he instilled, because he's such a massive guy, and he knew when to be quiet, but he also knew when to push your buttons. But I can't think of a case. I've seen him get angry. But the anger always came with either the X on the chest, which was a thing he used to do. He'd pull you close with his big hand, and he'd put a little X on your chest with his middle knuckle, and then he'd pop you in the sternum to wake you up. Like, hey, figure it out. Like, yeah, Bates, I got it. It just, the way he went about it, I coach with his style. Obviously, I can't replicate a 600-win coach, but I have the same kind of mindset when I coach. Push, but don't push too much, and let them know you're there, but still recede into the background. You know what I mean? Just real unbelievable guy and an unbelievable coach. And I know Schnupp or Gambino or Tom Downey, Brian Anderson. I can rattle off name after name that will say the exact same thing. Al
Nucci as well.
Yeah, right? Nucci, absolutely. Nucci the same way. You can just go down the list. And, I hope they name the field after him, either at Bellport or at Sachem, because he deserves to have his name plastered over whatever school decides to do that. I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, just a remarkable guy. Like you said, nobody had anything negative to say about him. I was with Neil Heaton the other day, and he kind of echoed that sentiment, saying,
Yeah, how's Neil doing with it? Neil?
Yeah, he was, he was choked up about it as well. But he's got fresh memories of him because he was working hand in hand at All Pro for years with him, and Belport would always come in there. So just touched a lot of people's lives in different ways, and someone that will never be forgotten in my estimation.
And he would hate this. He would hate all of this because he was just so unassuming.
He want to be the center of attention.
Never. Not his thing. Absolutely not his thing.
Absolutely. So we're just going to shift gears here. Yesterday, the other big storyline was, of course, the Hall of Fame voting. No players selected for the first time since 2013. And personally, I didn't care as much as in 2013 because as a diehard Piazza fan, that really hurt me. And, just the fact that they were working off of the whole hearsay that he might have been on steroids, and maybe because he had back acne and because his number, like, for me, I didn't get that. You should look at the production, and it just always seemed like there's this arbitrary line of what the writers choose to invoke. And, you can basically go back to the beginning of the time of the Hall of Fame, 1936, when they let in Ty Cobb, and they didn't care that he went into the stands and beat up a handicapped person or that he was an angry racist. So for me, I'm just like, why are we talking about character clauses if they chose to look the other way for years? So
because you're such a dominant player.
Yeah, and I guess what it comes down to, and Buster Olney tweeted this today, the Hall of Fame needs to come up with the definition of this so-called character clause. None of the other sports seem to abide by it. Marvin Harrison and Ray Lewis checkered past, but they were great football players.
O.J. Simpson's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, so you could go up and down in any sport. There's people that have issues, and it seems like for years the only one was gambling, right? And Pete Rose wasn't allowed in. The Hall of Fame is, the highest of the highs. Pete Rose isn't allowed in there. And then they added performance-enhancing drugs to it. But then that was ambiguous because who exactly is on this list? Is it the guys that were suspected of it? Was it the guys that were on the Mitchell report? Is it the guys that actually failed the drug test? So I guess where do you stand on that? Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, it's their last year next year.
Yep.
And I don't know. For me, it seems like they might get in on their last time. Maybe you get these guys that say, no, you paid your debt. Now
I don't think the writers will vote him in. I think the veteran committee will eventually get these guys in. I was just looking at it from the player's point of view. Every player, predominantly, these players are all saying, former players are like, these guys should be in. And look, the Hall of Fame is a number-based game between the lines. Whatever these guys did outside, just like you said, are we going that way? I think Barry Bonds is one of the best players I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I don't care if he was, I know the steroid era, but before that he was still considered, he had 3 MVPs, right? Before this whole late 90s performance stuff. If your numbers dictate that you're one of the best ever to play the game, you deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. That's my personal opinion. Whether that late 90s era, because the hypocrisy of it, look, that saved baseball in some certain extent. That 98 race with Sosa and McGuire, it reignited a passion for baseball that was starting to fade. The NBA was on the rise with Jordan, the NFL. Baseball was starting to sink. I think it was near hockey levels of
I was going to dive into that. So, I was young during that time, but I do remember McGuire's home run, the 60-second.
That little line drive that fell over the fence.
Steve Traxel, former Met great. But I guess from your perspective, because you were already an adult at the time, I mean, what did that do for the nation?
It was a whole that whole summer with Sammy and McGuire. That chase was must-watch TV, and they were putting the games on national television at the time. McGuire, he's at like 59 and 60. They'd cut to his at-bats during primetime television. Same thing with Sosa when I think he finished with, 66?
Yeah, it was 70 and 66. Yep.
And now you're just throwing those guys in a dumpster and saying, yeah, thanks a lot.
I know.
You know what I mean? You took steroids and now you can't be in. Look, at the end of the day, I still think Pete Rose deserves to be in, especially after this Astro stuff. That they kind of they got suspended for a year, the managers and maybe Belcher. They all paid a price, and now they're allowed to come back into the game. Pete bet on his team to win, and all right. So in the middle of summer, Pete's treating a game number 115 like it's the 7th game of the World Series, using his bullpen to make sure he gets the win so he can make a couple of bucks. At least he was playing to win. Every single game he was playing it like it was the 7th game of the World Series. If I'm a Met fan, Bobby Valentine used to coach every game like that. You know what I mean? Pete should be in the Hall of Fame.
I
And he
think
should be in the
they're
Hall of Fame before he passes away.
Yeah, I agree. I think they should. You can't tell the history of baseball without the best players. Are you saying that Barry Bonds is not part of MLB history? He was. I think their vantage point with the gambling was that he could have skewed the lines because what if it was a game he wasn't betting on? Was it a pitcher that he didn't believe in was on the mound? Maybe now the bets start coming in more heavier on the other team those days. But again, I wasn't alive for it, and I don't know. There's other things that have happened that guys have used for their advantage. I mean, talk about Mike Scott with scuffing the baseball.
Yep. Was
that not a performance enhancing? It's just a different definition of it. So I think the lines are way too blurry for it. And I want to pull up the numbers from yesterday exactly, and we'll go over a couple guys. I just want to get your opinion. So basically, we're in agreement with Bonds and Clemens are in the same category
100%.
where they're steroid users that are at the top of their respective positions,
Yes.
and I think they should be in. The situation with Schilling is different because there's not the steroids. You look at him, obviously not a steroid user, but 216 career wins, 3 World Series rings, and he's a divisive character. So do you think that is different?
I just don't think Schilling's numbers stand up to scrutiny. It's 200 wins, which is a great pitcher. Louis Tiant won 200 games. He won a World Series, right? With the oh no, he lost the World Series with the Red Sox. But 200 wins and his numbers. I looked at his numbers. His numbers are, his strikeout to walk ratio is pretty good and all that other stuff. But when Schilling pitched, he was an all-star. He wasn't an all-timer. So even based on whether it's politics or whatever his deal is, I'm indifferent. He set fire to like a gaming company or something at some point, and his numbers don't stand up. But at the end of the day, it all goes back to that Harold Baines decision to put Harold Baines in the Hall of Fame. Harold Baines was not a Hall of Famer in my opinion. Because if he's a Hall of Famer, that means Dwight Evans is a Hall of Famer. That means you can Don Mattingly's a Hall of Famer. Keith Hernandez is a Hall of Famer. But these guys are not. Thurman Munson should be in the Hall of Fame before Harold Baines. But those guys, they're not going to be voted in. They're not even on the ballot. I don't know if the veteran committee will vote them in.
Yeah, they've changed the rules a little bit over the last few years, and it seems like the motivation was to keep out the steroid guys. So for years it was, for 15 years, as long as you were above 5%, you were on the ballot. They cut it from 15 to 10. My estimation is because they didn't want to deal with the Bonds and Clemens thing for an extra 5 years. So they said, all right, we'll keep it to 10. Then a number of writers had petitioned to get the maximum amount of players vote for was 12 because they wanted to make it, I guess, a little bit easier to vote for all the guys they wanted to, and they declined it. So I think that was another way of saying, no, you have to decide on the guys that we already have. Let's make it a little bit harder.
Who else you got in there?
And then out of the guys that were close,
I saw Scott Roland.
Scott Roland had the biggest increase, and just based on precedent, he's going to get in because guys he's only in his 5th year and he's over 50%. So if he continues to trend up, and next year there's not really any slam dunks considering that A-Rod and
I got a comp to Scott Roland, a guy named Buddy Bell, who played for the Rangers in the mid-'70s all the way through the mid-'80s. Look at Buddy Bell's numbers and look at Scott Roland's numbers. And Buddy Bell was
Bell's father?
Yeah, exactly. Buddy Bell was a multiple All-Star, 7, 8, 9-time All-Star, third base, Gold Glover. He didn't have the power of Roland, but he was a 100 RBI guy. He's not in the Hall of Fame. Is Ted Simmons in the Hall of Fame? Ted Simmons was
he did get voted in,
by the veterans.
Yeah.
Not by the writers. Roland to me is another great player, not a Hall of Famer. Not a Hall of Famer. Who else you got?
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of it is that there's this healthy discourse. When I think about him, I watched his whole career, never was the best player in the league. Then it comes down to, all right, if we want to look at the Gold Gloves, the Silver Sluggers, he's a borderline for me. If you want to get him in, I don't know if he's not a slam dunk.
Is Jim Edmonds in?
No.
Is Jim Edmonds better than Scott Roland?
Probably the best defensive center fielder of the generation.
He had a couple of 40 home run seasons, 100 RBI seasons, Gold Glove seasons, miraculous catches.
Yeah, and here's another guy, Omar Viscal. I think some of the off-the-field stuff that came out might impact it. There was a history with the domestic abuse, which they take seriously, of course, but was probably the best defensive shortstop of his generation.
He wasn't Ozzie Smith, though. He wasn't Ozzie Smith, and his offensive numbers are average at best, right?
Yeah, he was a compiler. He played about 20 years, didn't get to 3,000 hits, never was the best player, was never one of the best hitters on his team.
Well, that's what like Omar Viscal's a great shortstop. He's a great major league. He's not a Hall of Famer. He's absolutely not a Hall of Famer, but
Yeah.
Like I said, the criteria has changed so much, and it all goes. I keep going back to Harold Baines. Harold Baines was a 22 to 25 home run, 80 to 100 RBI guy, played right field, batted 270, 280. He didn't get 3,000 hits. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? He didn't hit 450 home runs. If he's in, all these guys do have an argument, but Viscal in my eyes is not a Hall of Famer.
Here's a tough one, I think, because of the number of saves. Usually would dictate if you're a Hall of Famer or not. Billy Wagner didn't have as many as Mariano, didn't have as many as Trevor Hoffman, but on an inning per inning basis, better than Trevor Hoffman.
I think the closer, since they're interchangeable and you can put a setup guy in the closer, you can save 40 games for a couple of years and turn into a middle reliever 3 years later, and I think it has to be the closer role has to be Mariano, Suter. Maybe Gossage, somewhere in that window to be like Lee Smith's in, right?
Yeah.
Lee Smith's in.
Hoffman's in.
Yeah, Hoffman's in. Then maybe Billy does have a chance because I guess I put him in that Lee Smith territory. He's not in the Mariano, Suter, Gossage range, or Raleigh Fingers should be in that upper echelon. But Billy is maybe a borderline. But he also bounced around a little bit. And was he ever considered the preeminent closer in baseball? And how long did he have that title? 2
I would
years,
say
3 years?
no, because he had the misfortune of playing in Mariano's shadow. So then it comes down to what your interpretation is of being elite. I mean, during his prime, he was probably the second best closer, I would say. So for me, he's a yes, because I think that if he played, let's say he played 2-3 more years, maybe he gets 500 saves all of a sudden, he's considered to be an automatic. Whereas
now, are you partial because you're a Met fan and you
because I think the bulk of his domination happened with the Astros. In the late 90s was definitely his prime. Then he went to the Phillies, did a lot of damage against the Mets, and the Mets got him in 2006. And he really only had a couple years. I think they signed him to a 4-year deal, so 6, 7, 8, 9, and then they traded him because they fell out of the race in 2009 for outfielder Chris Carter.
Chris Carter had a good run.
That was during the prime of the, I guess you would say, the Wilpons financial issues, where you have a closer, one of the best in the game, and you just look to unload him. So we'll take your 30-year-old outfielder that has no career,
Chris
no
Carter,
numbers.
my goodness.
And then here's another guy that I think is very borderline, but was one of the best outfielders during his day, Gary Sheffield. 500 home runs.
Absolutely Hall of Fame.
With him, I think it's a steroid issue with a connection to that. But at his peak, he was probably, I don't know.
He's a Hall of Famer.
He was definitely a top 5 hitter during the mid 2000s, during that range, and had the longevity too. He came up.
He was an infield shortstop. He was a shortstop with the Brewers when he came up. Then he went to third. Then he went to the outfield. Yeah, and he was an all-star, I think, at third. And then he's a Hall of Famer. How many hits did he end up? He didn't get 3,000, right?
No, he was in the 2,000 to 2,500 range, but almost 20 years, 500 home runs. If one of the most hollow records of all time when he hit his 500th with the Mets.
With the Mets, yeah, it was like 14,000 people there. And
early April, and he's celebrating. The Met fans are, I guess we have to celebrate because it's a significant moment. But
he was with us for 20 minutes at 500. Good for him.
Yep. Again, that was a cheap Mets move. They said, all right, we can put a name, sell some jerseys, and that's what it was. And he was gone before the end of the year. Andrew Jones, center fielder, 10 Gold Gloves, and if you broke down his career, if he would have retired at 30 years old, I think he would have had a better chance to get in than if he continued to play, because the perception of him was that he was old and fat and was on,
batted 220, hit 40 home runs.
And recency bias worked against him. Whereas if he would have just said, all right, my arm hurts, I can't play anymore, after he left the Braves in like 2005, his numbers were as good as anybody at that point. Yep. And you remember how tough it was to get something past him. He was the premier center fielder in the National League. Yeah.
I would say he's more of a Hall of Famer than Roland or Viscal or anything like that. What percentage did he get? He probably got in the 30s?
Yeah, very low. He had 33%.
How was that guy dismissed, but Scott Roland gets in the over 50? I just don't get it.
I just think it's the perception. Like, when people look back on it, they say, all right, well, Andrew Jones had a rough last few years.
But who was a better center fielder than Andrew Jones when he was in his prime? From 25 to 30? No one.
Edmonds was the only one that was close. But you got to say, that run, when he came up as a rookie in 1996, burst on the scene with the 2 home runs against the Yankees in the World Series. For the next 10 years, you couldn't get a ball by him.
100%.
And with that pitching staff with the Braves, that was caused a lot of sleepless
he's on an
nights
iconic 90s team, and he was one of the best players and one of the best players in baseball. Yes, I would go with Andrew Jones getting in at some point.
Yep. And then there's 2 steroid guys underneath that, Manny Ramirez and Sosa. We don't have to go back to that. But here's somebody that is
Isn't it funny how we just dismissed those two amazing baseball players? Yeah,
No,
whatever.
but he's in the same category.
I agree.
Basically said that. So,
I agree.
Jeff Kent, second baseman. The reason why I don't think he's a Hall of Famer is because the only argument for him is that he has the most home runs as a second baseman. But what happens if he was a third baseman? All of a sudden, that doesn't mean.
and he's the perfect example of the writer's bias because him and the writers they had some serious issues.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He apparently didn't treat writers well, so they never, that there was a lot of animosity there, kind of like Eddie Murray. But Eddie Murray just didn't talk to the press, like literally just didn't talk to the press for like 15 years. Nah, I got nothing to offer. All-Star Hall of Famer. Nah, I'm good.
And that's one of the other issues is that the writers have this power. And because he annoyed them now.
Or he didn't say hi to their kid when they walked into the clubhouse. No, he's not making the Hall of Fame. Yeah.
Meanwhile, they probably didn't have they probably had some unsavory things to say about it. Maybe that factored into it as well.
I still think the players, former players, coaches, guys that were in the game are the ones that should make the decision on who's in their Hall of Fame.
Yeah. And not to mention, Kent benefited from the presence of Barry Bonds more than anybody. Nobody wanted to pitch to Bonds. We'll pitch to Kent.
Yep.
And Barry Bonds is in the Hall of Fame, but Kent might get it.
Kent was a good. He has an MVP though. And
he won in 2000, but you can make the argument that he had it because Bonds walked 200 times. Nobody wanted to face him.
That's insane too, by the way.
And then there's a couple guys that really have no chance. The Tim Hudsons. These guys that are under 5%, they're off the ballot. Just above him, Tory Hunter. He's another guy. Great defensive center fielder. Yeah. Didn't put up really the offensive production, I would say, probably.
Couple-time All-Star. Good player.
Yeah. And let's see. Oh, here's a big one. Todd Helton, I glossed over. I got to say, probably one of my favorite players growing up because as a lefty first baseman, and he just put up unbelievable numbers. And
the Colorado bias?
Yeah, there was this bias. It almost seemed like it didn't matter what he did. No matter what numbers he put up, it was always going to be the perception that it was inflated, even if it was astronomical. He had 372. Actually, you could make the argument that he could have won the MVP over Kent that year. I just think because he didn't make the playoffs. 372 with 44 home runs, and it was just scoffed at. No,
he got under 5%.
No. He wasn't at 5%.
What was his number? Because exactly, Todd Helton was considered one of
45. So
all right, so they're paying attention. So he might tick up. You never know.
I would say so. Historically, first basemen they just seem to have a bias against them. Outside of like Lou Gehrig. And how many first basemen are in the Hall of Fame? There's less than 10.
Yeah, less than 10. You can start rattling off like Willie Stargell and guys like that, Willie McCovey and stuff. But
really, the list doesn't go much further than that because guys like Fred McGriff, for whatever reason,
who I think is a Hall of Famer. I think Fred McGriff's a Hall of Famer.
493 home runs, and they look at it as, well, he didn't get 500.
But he batted cleanup for every team he was on until he retired. Like, from the moment he came up to the bigs to the moment he retired, he batted in the middle of orders of every professional baseball team.
And he won 2 rings with the Blue Jays, I think, right?
And he hit close to 500 homers.
Yeah. So
and he was the crime dog. He had a nickname, and
because when you look back, like just in your mind's eye, like what's the perception of him? It was that he was the most dangerous hitter in every lineup, right?
Now that goes hand in hand. Where's Delgado fit in this mix when he's eligible? Is Delgado?
No, he fell off.
See, exactly. Is Delgado and McGriff, those two? Delgado over
470 home runs.
Omar Viscal. You know what I mean? I know they play different positions, but Delgado was a dominant player for 13 years?
Yeah.
And his numbers are
And he was
excellent.
good right up until he retired. He didn't fall off a cliff. I think he had an injury, and then the Mets called up Ike Davis. So you had
Ike Davis. Oh, boy.
You had a guy with 470 career home runs, was the best hitter on the team, was a cleanup hitter on the Mets right up until the day he retired and fell off the ballot like that. So that's when I have a problem with the voting because it just seems like there's just an arbitrary determination of what actually
matters. So writers, based on their personal relationships with some of these guys that we never get to see, they're making decisions on. We watch baseball all the time. Some of these names getting shortchanged like that.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's going to be interesting to see how things change because really after A-Rod and Poppy, which will be a story for the next several years.
Yes, it will.
The next question was going to be, all right, what's the new standard to get into the Hall of Fame? Because there's going to be no more 300-game winners. I think that's a good topic to end on because that was such a big part of baseball, was that allure of like the round numbers, the 3,000 hits, which we still might see some. Miguel Cabrera could get 3,000 hits, but I don't think there's going to be another 300-game winner. The only guy with hope was Verlander, and then he had Tommy John surgery this
what's he
year.
at, like 250?
Yeah, so he would have needed to put up like 3 or 4 more good years, which after Tommy John, that's probably not going to happen.
Not going to happen. But then again, I didn't think Glavine would get the 300, and he did too. So,
yeah.
Because they were barking like this back in the 90s, saying that no one was going to win 300 games.
Really? Back then?
Yeah, because Glavine was a 6-inning guy, and Maddox was like a 6-7 inning guy. If you look at their complete games, they were getting, 5-6 a year, 4 a year?
Well, Maddox was notorious for taking himself out of games, right? He would throw 70 pitches in 7
enough,
innings.
I'm out. Get the bullpen in there. Mark Wohlers, get loose, yeah.
And they always had a good bullpen, so it didn't really affect his wins and losses. But then you look at somebody like DeGrom, who he's not going to get 200
He has like 60 wins or something like that. It's crazy.
You feel bad for him at the same time. It's like, at least he gets recognized, because the Mets bullpen and the offense were so bad that he gets talked about more because of that. What happens if he won 18 games and then nobody's saying that he's getting robbed? It's
and
just
the worst part
that
is,
he's a good
you
pitcher.
saw the Union nixed the DH in the National League. You saw that, right?
Well, they haven't officially. They were trying to tie it into the postseason, so they nixed that.
So we're going to watch
concept.
DeGrom get pinch hit for in the 6th inning 4 or 5 times and get taken out of games and 1-1 games instead of letting him pitch and having a DH where he can just go out and pitch 7-8 innings every time.
Yeah. And there was an interesting article on ESPN the other day. They basically said that throughout history, there's about, at any given time, 40 active players that wind up being in the Hall of Fame, which I thought was pretty interesting. I never thought of it like that. So, like, right now you got the no-brainers like Albert Pujols, who's going to go down as probably the second best first baseman of all time behind Lou Gehrig. Miguel Cabrera, slam dunk. Mike Trout, you could basically say he's a slam dunk at this point because he's going to continue to play, and he's already got 75 WAR, which actually is a threshold that they look at now. One behind Ken Griffey for his career. How about that stat?
And how old is Trout now?
He's 29, and he's already got 10 years, and he's already, from a statistical, like a rate basis, he's on track with any player in history, basically. So you could say he's a slam dunk at this point. But beyond that, they got a little bit deeper with speculation on far as guys like Juan Soto, for example. Like, you could be looking at the beginning of a Hall of Fame career, basically. But they're going to have to make decisions on. Oh, and Clayton Kershaw is another no-brainer because he's already there. But they're going to have to make decisions on what do they actually weigh. What is more important? When you look at a guy like DeGrom, people might laugh and say, well, he's got no chance. But he's 32 and he's healthy. What happens if he pitches 8 more years and finishes with 199 career wins? He's in that Johan Santana category where didn't have 300 wins, didn't have 3,000 strikeouts, but for a small period of time was the best pitcher in the game, which kind of there is precedent for it, which is Sandy Koufax. So there's really not a lot of guys like that, right?
And you know what? Pedro might be the other guy, right? Pedro had a pocket of like 8 years of pure dominance.
Yeah, where they made the exception for him and Koufax, where it's like, look, you can't overlook the best pitcher of a generation.
But DeGrom's had a good 5-year run? We'll see. That those are questions that 32-year-old pitchers. Yeah, that is a roll of dice. 32-year-old pitcher, even though his mechanics are unbelievable.
Yeah, I think under most circumstances, you would say it's not a safe bet that he would stay healthy, but he stays in great shape and he's got great mechanics. And since his Tommy John in 2010. He's been healthy, knock on wood. So
I just don't want to walk through the Hall of Fame when I go to visit and go to the hall where it's Omar Viscal, Harold Baines, and Scott Roland. I'm looking at their plaques saying, "Come on!"
Yeah, you're like, I live for that.
No disrespect to those guys; they're awesome players.
Yeah, it should be a certain bar though. If you're the Hall of Fame is for the best of the best. And so, lastly, before we sign off here, big news with Suffolk County and Nassau County. Nassau today. Just laying out their guidelines to start the season. So do you think it's feasible? Are you excited that they finally put this on paper?
Yes. Now that winter's going and football's going to go and baseball's going to go behind it, we're probably going to go. I saw the state championship is up in Binghamton on June 10th. Mm-hmm. So they threw it all in the coaches' laps. I'm assuming most of the coaches will figure it out. And, let's go. We start our workouts this weekend, so I'm excited. And as we go forward, the winter guys, I feel bad for the basketball guys and the volleyball and wrestling. That they're under duress a little bit because they start Monday. So they really got to get all these kids on the same page, get all the health stuff figured out, the protocols in place before they go on Monday. And, coaches, they get cleared to play, they'll figure it out. So
Yeah.
I'm excited, man. I'm very excited.
Yeah, they have incentive to do it. You want your season to go on without a whimper, you got to follow the guidelines. So.
Watching football players play football in baseball weather in March is going to be interesting too, by the way, because they play in the fall on that 55 Saturday.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had been advocating that for 5 years. I said,
well, we're going to see it now.
Because the first year that I started doing this, I remember we had a brutal winter / spring, and I remember saying, this is kind of like football weather. Maybe they should just play football in the spring.
Well,
But
all those guys that wanted spring football, let's see how it plays out.
the only issue
that's
that I saw was that if a kid is going to play in college, they're going to have 2 seasons in one calendar year. So it's a risk, but you hope that nobody gets injured. Really, that's all it would come down to at that point. But thank you guys for tuning in to the 3rd episode of Talking Baseball with Pars and Vinny. Thank you to St. Anthony's for hosting this, and thank you for Brothers 3 for sponsoring.